looking forward to this amazing motion that interests me a lot as well. With no further ado, we would like to welcome the Prime Minister from Tokyo to open his 7 minutes opening speech. Here.
Yeah. If we click on just button.
Can you hear me? Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, this debate is about ultimate decision in emergency. In general cases, commander should behave morally, and if it is morally contentious, commander should discuss whether it is morally acceptable or not by a lot of people, participants. But we are talking about emergency. There is no time to evacuate. There is no time to discuss with politicians or other commanders in the society. We think in that case, commanders should be responsible to protection of citizens in the nation. That's why we think even though it's morally contentious, and we don't think it's morally perfectly good, but we say commanders should behave in this way. That sounds coming from Prime Minister. First, from Prime Minister, I will talk about mainly two things. First of all, what you will lose when you don't use the weapon and what you can protect in outside the house. And secondly, principally, why commander should be responsible for using the weapon. But before that, some clarification regarding this particular motion. We don't know what kind of law we are talking about. It's not specified in the motion, but in general, if you lose a war, you will highly likely to lose a lot. It's the life of citizens, it's the profit of citizens, it's the economical loss of citizens, it will be a lot. And the sacrifice in this debate will be your soldier and maybe opponent soldiers. We assume citizens, innocent citizens, civilians are not there and already evacuated. Thousands or tens of thousands people might be sacrificed, but we are not talking about civilians in this case of sacrifice. And in general cases, soldiers are bluntly engaged with military functions. It is, in most countries, it is not the mandatory conscription. When we consider some countries are introducing conscription, it is often an imminent threat for that country, like in Israel, flying a conflict with nation, and in South Korea, it is in the conflict right now. If they claim that some country like Singapore are implementing the conscription, we're not going to talk about that. If you want to do that, or the different debate whether or not it is morally good or conscription or not, but we are talking about, in most cases, in general cases, they are voluntarily engaged with military function. That's the basic definition from outside the house. So, any questions? No? So, directly going to my first point. So, what we will lose in the outside the house? We are talking about peaceful negotiation after ending the war, like protection of citizens, protection of territory. Those kinds of negotiation cannot be done if you lose the war. There is no guarantee that no this will happen after losing the war. Like territorial sovereignty in the dispute will be lost in the outside the house, and a massive compensation will be required by the opponents in the outside the house. It will damage your country in long term, politically, economically, and your citizens might be caused to leave your hometowns. In worst cases, your citizens will be abducted by opponents in that territory in dispute. It's terrible for a nation. There is no guarantee that opponents peacefully end the war after they don't use a weapon and they end the war. We think as a nature of war, it's unexpectable for how the opponents will behave. What will happen after this choice is unknown. We don't defuse this weapon. They will, for example, likely to advance more intervention if the enemy is more malicious, and sometimes they will be seated in the negotiation table, but it's unacceptable. That's the nature of war. That's why you will significantly use a lot in more high propensity. So what we can guarantee in this war? We have to sacrifice thousands of soldiers and tens of thousands of soldiers in the outside house. We have to admit that. But we can protect millions of people's life or millions of people's potential future life in more good manner. We think that is potential achievement in the outside house. We have to protect from outside the house. So a more important question about principle, but because the practicality is unknown in this unspecified context, so I want to talk about the principle of this debate. In general cases, commanders should behave morally as we told you in introduction. It's if it's morally contentious, we have to talk about which is morally good, which is morally acceptable, or something like that. But we are talking about emergency. There's no time to consider law. There's no time to evacuate your soldiers if you don't, even though you use a weapon. But we have to assume then there is already existing weapon which is developed in long term, which is developed in the situation that you can push the button of that weapon. We think in general they are technically, legally allowed to use a weapon because you have the button in your hand that is technically allowing you to use a weapon as a consensus of a nation. So in that situation, what commander should prioritize in this way? First of all, Mr. Speaker, the responsibility of military in general is to protect citizens even though you sacrifice yourself. That's a basic principle in the military. It is a high propensity for military militants to lose their life in the battlefield. It is a consensus, it is a consent of military and militants in outside the house. And also, particularly, we are talking about commanders. They have to follow a principle. It is not morally good to input your own morality that soldiers shouldn't die, soldiers should be prioritized, because you are already responsible for a citizen in your territory. It should be the prioritized morality in this case. Yes.
Soldiers are citizens in your country too. Why do you allow this? Why would a general neglect the responsibility to soldiers?
We don't kill civilians in general, but we kill soldiers in the battlefield. That is a basic consensus of military and militants. They consented to death in the battlefield. That's why they are paid more compared to citizens. They are paying compensation for potential death, and they are consented to that in the vast majority of cases. They are saying it's immoral to sacrifice thousands to protect someone. It's some cases it's immoral to sacrifice thousands to protect big national profits. But we are talking about losing the war. It matters a lot. As I told you, it's territory. It's about citizens' life. It is about long-term economical, political development in the outside the house. It's morally acceptable to sacrifice thousands to protect more thousands of people or more millions of people in the outside the house. And secondly, as I told you in the first argument, in a practical sense, we think it's already legitimate because they are already given the right to use a weapon by, for example, the council in their nation, because they already developed a weapon to utilize a weapon in the battlefield. That is assumption that should happen in this particular motion, even though we don't know a lot about this motion. It is a basic assumption in the outside the house. They have the right to use a weapon. They are given the button of the weapon. That is the legitimacy we are talking about. Mr. Speaker, we don't know about this motion much, but it is clear we lose a lot of profits, a lot of life of citizens. That is clear. And also responsibility of militaries is very clear to protect the nation, and it is the consensus of military and civilians. That's why we're proud to propose.
We thank the Prime Minister Yoshihide for giving an amazing speech, opening speech. We would therefore like to welcome
Test.
So the main idea from OO is that you never consent to death, and you're pushing people to death. That's bad. But being a soldier, it's inevitable that you can be in a situation that you die. So you don't know where you'll be deployed. You don't know the consequences of war. World War I was thought to end in weeks. It actually happened to be the most dreadful war in that age. Vietnam War, soldiers of the US never consented to the tragedy that they were exposed to by Vietcong or to a movie we see, Platoon. That is a sort of the complex situation of war, and it's wrong for them to say that it's a clean thing on their side of the house. But more importantly, when we know the existence of the bomb, soldiers are reminded of the possibility of that. In the same way, soldiers are only reminded of the possibility of deployed in the detrimental area. Soldiers are only reminded of the possibility that they might be mentally traumatized or in an unfortunate situation of PTSD. And it's no different. And it's wrong for them to say that when they also have a system of soldiers, that is a defense that they can go on with. A couple of rebuttals in one simple important substantive. On a moral comparative of commanders, recognizing that there's a utilitarian comparative between the soldier's life and the nation's interest, what is the ultimate role of the commander? Which was it to abide by? Rebuttal. So, they told us that some weapons are bad. This is the same. Cluster bombs, nuclear weapons, or chemical weapons, things like that. The point of that is that the consequences of those things are uncontrollable, are uncontainable. Cluster bombs are bad because these clusters are like go into the deep underground or in certain unidentifiable areas, and after war, it remains and harms individuals.
Yeah.
Landmines, same. Chemical weapons, it's uniquely uncontrollable and have devastating consequences indiscriminately to the area, and that's why it's bad. And also important to note is that these weapons don't lead to victory. They often don't lead to victory. And this one leads to definite victory. So it's totally different. Then they said that, so you don't consent to it, I've already rebutted to it, but also the great argument about universal human rights or something like that. So that doesn't stand because we're talking about soldiers. Soldiers have their own unique special framework of law where they are justified in killing others and justifying being killed. And the only exception is when they become soldiers but abandon that fight. These individuals have not abandoned that fight yet, and the simplistic humanitarian framework simply is not applicable. You have to do better. And they said that you can't order soldiers to die. But the problem is that, for example, in the fighting for retreat, some soldiers have to be forced to be on the last part of the retreating army. That the proximity of death on the last part of a retreating army is more than, if I remember correctly, 60 or 70%, which is totally different from 30% or even less in a natural situation. That means that generally soldiers are going to die, and in their moral comparative, they are not even justified in forming that sort of army or even executing a retreating strategy. And that's one of the insane things that you could do, rather immoral, considering the comparative that these commanders owe. And that's why the case dies. So, what is the moral comparative of commanders? Once again, it is an emergency situation that commanders usually consult with people who are responsible for human rights or people who are responsible for other concerns or financial restraints or whatever. But ultimately, because it's an unfortunate situation that commanders are entitled to it and that he's the only actor to make that decision, he has to go through the basics of his role, and that's why he is entitled to that decision. And unfortunately, he's also right to do that. The question is, what is the role of the commander to go on with? And what we point to the fact is that the basics is that he leans to the interest of the nation than the soldier's life. Because the army exists because national interest and all the interest intertwined to it, the consequences that are unpredictable, the loss of the economies that are all unpredictable. You can't calculate it. It's not like you can calculate the sum of equal to human life. But because it's so complex but definitely important, we are justifying in contracting individuals to die in the name of soldiers. The system of the army and the war itself, it says that the complex and unpredictable but huge consequences of having the absence of the national defense are far more important than a few individuals made to consent to the possibility and the likeliness of death. And commanders are the leader of that system, and the commanders are responsible for executing that comparative of saying that national defense, this vague, unpredictable, huge consequence, is more important than the few subset of individuals, soldiers, being forced to sacrifice their lives. And commanders in that system are responsible for that specific nuance. There might be other nuances of human rights, there might be other nuances of economic prosperity that our politicians might be responsible about. But commanders uniquely are responsible to that narrative and to that order. That means that when commanders are in an unfortunate circumstance of emergency and the only actor to make that decision, his responsibility, at least, is to prioritize the unpredictable but huge national interest by sacrificing the few people who have consented to death. And because commanders exist for that, it's wrong for them to say that commanders should abandon it, because once again, commanders exist for that. But also to know is that this unpredictable future is not some vague thing, but it's quite huge. My partner already talked about the consequences of losing a war. The huge compensations or loss of a national territory and an important natural resource would be depriving the nation of the economic prosperity, often meaning that numerous people who could have been born in that nation or who should have prospered in that nation would be suffering from the devastation of losing that economic opportunity or war. But also important to note that wars are also just a series of wars, that it might be a one war out of the collective of war. In losing that war, it might be that the entirety of the war falls on the other side, where you are forced to go on with massive retreating operations in other situations, where the subset of soldiers in that battlefield are battlefield are harmed, but also if you don't do that, the collective of other soldiers in other battlefields are forced into far more detrimental situations. Or it might be that your soldiers are protecting a city where you just go on with retreating or just go away. Your city becomes a battlefield and unconsenting civilians are victimized in that scenario. There are numerous consequences. There might be even more detrimental scenarios. But a collective, because it's generally far more detrimental, it's an unjustifiable tragedy for the nation. That's why collectively national defense is so important, and why national defense collectively justifies the system of a soldier. Just reminded that I didn't take a POI, but never mind. So, what have I told you? I've told you that wars are not just losing all those soldiers, but losing all national interests. Like deprived of your autonomy as a nation, your national unity, or your economic prosper, maybe life because these people might treat you as animals in a barbaric way. You also lose the city behind you and all that. But regardless of the consequence and the unpredictability, because it's so unpredictable, we justify the sacrifice of these individuals. Commanders are for that, and for that we propose.
We thank Shikara Mizokami for the amazing speech. We would like to welcome the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Julius Cueto. Here.
This debate, this 56 minutes, is going to be that general's one blink of an eye. That's why we have to make a decision. It is unjustifiable for opening government to use the mere logic of it being an emergency to justify the use of weapons. Because when the general is in that position, when the general usually has a role to only consider what he's doing right now, but that's not the context. He has to consider the consequences of war. He has to consider how other politicians, or how he would have given an order, particularly because it's an emergency. That's why we think the general has to make a decision. And we think that particular decision that the general should make in that brief moment is not to neglect his role existing inside him. We think that general, in that brief second, he has to consider the consequences, and he has to consider the moral meaning of killing all his soldiers in battlefield in the sake for his own citizens. We don't think it's justifiable, and that's why we do not want to take this motion. That's why its emergency is not a reason to take this motion. The one extension I want to provide you from Deputy Leader of Opposition is, considering the consequences of a war, can we first of all even ask our citizens to sacrifice their lives 100%? Because this is the difference. This is not a retreating match where 60 or 70% may die, or some people might get served. This is an instance where you're ordering 100% of your citizens to sacrifice their life. We don't think that should happen, we don't think that should be done. We think it's immoral for a state to happen to do that, and that's going to be the extension coming from Deputy Leader of Opposition. But one extraneous refutation to side opening government. So they tried to say, because other weapons are used, we should allow this one too. The one logic. So if we consider how life is lost, for example in the case of opening government, that it being unpredictable or it being excessive, why shouldn't we consider how many of those lives are lost in the first place? Because the only justification they gave from opening government was that it's predictable or it can definitely lead to a war. Using many damn bullets, which causes excessive damage to a body, has a controllable consequences, and using many of them will lead to the consequence of a war. But we don't use them particularly because even within war, we consider how a life is lost. And we argue from opening option that when you consider how a life is lost, we have to consider how many lives we're going to take. This is the particular difference and where we have to consider how many lives are lost. Because even if you consider that, even if opening option government says, because we can kill every single person, it's sort of controllable, that's not a reason. You're not controlling how many lives are being lost, so we don't think that reasoning coming from opening government and the justification of the already existing means is a reason for them to be justified themselves. Moving on to the extension, comparing the consequences of war, what is it the unjust thing to ask the soldiers, and even if they're prerequisitely asked, informed, why the generals still must not take this choice. So first thing we want to clarify in the option is that the consequences of war, surrendering, is not as bad as the government side might want to think about to us. Because the process of war or ending a war in the modern age is not a brutal raping of like Mongolians going into our society or how the Mongolian Empire dominated our society. The rather process is that they have maybe independent countries which are unrelated to war coming and intermediating. If there's excessive human rights violations as a result of the war, for example, the Russian Soviet coming into Japan after the war and trying to take away land, they'll have face massive criticization from the international community. And furthermore, even from the incentive of the countries who's invading, if you consider how Germany reacted to the end of the First World War, it's unlikely that they're going to impose such an extensive burden among these countries. So the conclusion of this analysis is the end of war, even if we surrender, is still somewhat controllable and is not as that bad as government side wants to say. So the point is saying this is unsurmountably damaging, and that's in itself a reason to not use of this weapon does not stand. No, thank you. But furthermore, but we still agree, there are consequences of war. Yes, citizens' villages will be lost, citizens' lives may be lost. But we don't think that's still a reason why we can ask our soldiers to be able to consent to this kind of thing, and I'll order their citizens to die 100%. But before we go on, any point of aversions? Opening.
So how can soldiers rationalize this complex situation and conclude a rational balance of interest in a few hours where they're not professional? Like they can. Isn't that very irresponsible?
No. We're making that decision for them, even if it might take us to debate this plot topic for 56 minutes or 33 hours, but we're the ones who are making the moral decision. And that's why this debate is not, this House believes generals should have a right to use that weapon. It's this House will use that weapon as the general. So that point of the information is irrelevant to this debate. Moving on to the extension, continuing my reason. Why we cannot ask the soldiers to 100% die in a battle. Because if you look at opening government analytics where they have done, they've never justified 100% death or consent.
Yeah.
They've only talked about retreat armies where 60 or 70% might die, or they've talked about a war scenario where some people may die. This is a completely different scenario. So at this instance in itself, opening government is not defending this motion. They're just saying soldiers might die in a war, but not particularly this way. What we're going to tell you from opening option is why in this particular way we cannot ask these citizens to die, soldiers to die. Because as we have pointed out at the point of information, these soldiers are part of that country too. And what we think is, yes, these soldiers are asked to go to the war, but particularly when opening government does characterize this state in a way as not a dictatorship, we're not mandatory conscribing these citizens or these soldiers going to war. It's likely that always the states are asking the citizens to go into the war and actually sacrifice the right. But the important difference is that the state, who has the responsibility to every single citizen within society, is asking these people to go help us in the war. But that does not mean that we can ask them to kill themselves or 100% required. Why is this so? Because for the state to justify the actions of prioritizing their own citizens' benefit, the reason is they want to save their own citizens. But we've told you that this part of the citizens is those soldiers and they have to consider them. What does this mean? Sorry. What I mean in a few seconds. So this means that if the part of the state, which is particularly responsible for every single citizen, have to consider these things as an instance where this happened. Because you're only asking these soldiers to go into war, but it's at the same time. That's why we think, even if there are consequences of war, or even if there are those kind of things, it's ultimately the state, the collective amount of citizens, the government side is trying to prioritize, who have consented to that war to happen, and they have consented to the result of war. War cannot happen without any consequences. When the moment the government at any state decides to enter a war, we believe that citizens have to consent that they might suffer some consequences from that war. That's why particularly we think it's irresponsible for any moral judgment or any moral judgment based on a state to neglect the only citizens on this whole ground field just because they can save the other citizens back in the country, particularly because all the citizens should have consented to the situation. So the conclusion of this analysis is that yes, soldiers, yes, the consequences of war might be bad. We've told you that it might not be that bad, but they might still exist. But war is not without consequences. There are consequences, and a state should enter, and they are entering the war in a situation. When a state has consented to into that war, and when civilians who have agreed to get into the war exist, we don't think it is justifiable for soldiers to ask to die in the sake of their benefits for 100%. So for all these reasons, we're proud to oppose. Thank you very much.
We thank Julius Crato for the amazing yellow speech. We would like to welcome the member of the government hearing.
Ladies and gentlemen, life is not intrinsic value. Soldier, life is under the control of commander. The motion spirit is, its murder of soldier by commander to save the nation is justified. We directly answer this question irrespective of consent of soldier that is strongly fetishized by opening opposition. Also just said it's all about utilitarianism, but the consequence is hugely ambiguous in opening half. And they never substantiate why. Opening opposition is much worse, because we don't kill soldiers because they have a humanity, but humanity is important because it's humanity. But why that is the case? We think this direct logical analysis on philosophy is uniquely given by the closing comment. This is the core and the most relevant thing in this debate. I'm going to talk about three things. First, why life is not intrinsic fundamental values, and secondly, why society, as an actor, why society can decide the value of life, and thirdly, in this particular case, why there is a commander. First, why life is not intrinsically fundamentally valued. What we have to recognize here is that having life itself does not have a moral value, because life is a mere continuation of your physical and biological existence. It's all about replication and reproduction of your human cells. Your life is a physically defined atoms and a physical body, and your just physical existence. The thing is, morality does not derive from the mere physical existence, ladies and gentlemen, because morality is merely assumed to exist by human imagination. Things like people like philosophers and academics. It means the value of life is merely a social creation, and it's posed by the society, ladies and gentlemen. It is not, the value of life does not inherently exist to your mere physical and biological existence, ladies and gentlemen. What is the implication of this? It nicely leads to the second extension, why in this particular case society can decide right. What the implication of value of life is social construct. It means that the value of the life is created by society. It means society have a control over your life, your value of life. Society, government have a right to soldier of life in this particular circumstances. That is exactly why states can decide whose life should be prioritized. For example, allocation of medical resources, in the case of death penalty in criminal justice system, ladies and gentlemen. And commanders are authorized by the states to evaluate the value of life of a soldier in this particular circumstances, ladies and gentlemen. We think commander can decide, even in their side of the house, commander decide the value of soldier in so many circumstances. Where to defend your base? It is the western broad line or eastern front line. Where to send your troops? It is your factory or is your other factory? Where to send your logistic to your eastern battlefield or western battlefield? What kind of weapons you going to research and develop? Is it warship, a rifle? Is who soldier to send your enemy space? Things like that. All this decision was made by the generals. Actually directly impacts the life of the soldier, but nonetheless we decided because the soldier, not soldier, but commander is the one to decide the value of life in this very severe circumstances, ladies and gentlemen. We think, therefore, that's why commander can choose who to say in accordance with obligation to the state by the commanders. But you disagree.
If life is meaningless, and if life is only a mere social construct, what is the responsibility of the commander back to save their own society if everything is meaningless?
Because society deems that it's important in this particular circumstances, in accordance in states and society calculus, you can decide it in the very first place. You just think logic, you're hugely illogical. So, first, certainly, so why in this particular circumstances, very difficult circumstances, why commander can allow to to decide whose soldier we gonna say. Because the thing is, soldiers, commanders are authorized by the society, and the structure of society is usually appointed by the president, who is democratically like decided, and also they are like have a mandate by the society. They said like nonetheless they have a responsibility to our citizens as well. But the thing is, this degree of responsibility is hugely different, ladies and gentlemen. Because like the soldier is the one soldier is a part of the army, ladies and gentlemen. We think, therefore, if their logic is true, the responsibility towards soldier, the responsibility towards civilian is totally equal. Why don't you construct the civilian in the very first place? They have equal obligation, equal responsibility to defend the nation. That is not hugely inconsistent in opening opposition power. So, what I want to say here is, only insofar as responsibility towards a citizen and towards a soldier is different. Therefore, in this particular circumstances, like generals are allowed to decide the value of life of soldier in the very first place. Therefore, we also think that soldiers and not soldiers, the generals have a right to commodify the life of soldier in many circumstances. In the circumstances, you send the troops, the bunch of soldiers, to the enemy base. Actually, you objectify the soldier as a destroying machine of your enemy's base, ladies and gentlemen. In this particular circumstances, since generals are allowed to decide the value of life, we think this is the most important thing in this story. But you disagree, opening opposition again.
So we provided you many reasons socially why soldiers' life are important. So please tell me why that commander, which is now handed that value to decide, is allowed to decide that soldiers are unimportant and socially undeemable.
And judges just look at the notes of opening opposition. What they say is, society should respect the civilian and soldiers as well because they are the part of society and everyone's society has a humanity. Without explaining what humanity is, why is it important, why we do something we feel prioritized. What I'm going to tell you is the philosophical justification of the commanders to decide the value of soldier, which is directly clashing with the assumption of opening opposition. What I have told you, we think the value of life should be decided by the society, and in this particular circumstance, it is fundamentally justified. Only insofar in this space, there's no play winner concerning the outcome of the war. You cannot justify in a utilitarian way. You cannot justify just talking about consent. You can justify without analyzing what is the life is, what is the value of life is, who decided that, and if, in this particular circumstance, it is generals. Vote for the closing comment. Thank you very much.
We thank Atsushi Sumida for the amazing MG speech. We would like to welcome the member of the opposition here.
I'm going to do 4 things in my speech that I think are important contributions to this debate. First, I'm going to talk to you about what kind of principles do this military uphold and why as a commander they have to work to protect those principles and act in a certain way. Second of all, I'm going to talk to you about the principle of morality that we should take in this debate and why we don't treat soldiers as objects that we can sacrifice in order, even if that is the best strategy for the country. And then I'm going to talk about what is the real cost of victory. Even if we can actually destroy the enemy and win the war and place our nation above theirs, why it is still meaningless? Because we have sacrificed our humanity to ends that can never be recovered, right? We think that is extremely important, right? And I'm going to differentiate what is humanity really, right? Because we say that humanity is something that separates us from animals, right? The fact that we can work together and like I lay down my life for like my partner is something that animals will never do, right? Animals can only like pursue like survival for the fittest. They will sacrifice their own in order to keep their entire stock going, right? But the thing that defines individuality and humanity is that sometimes, even if the end purpose is something that is good, we still follow certain morals because those morals are what defines us as humans and is what makes humanity so important. But more about that later. And finally, I'm also going to talk about why it's, even if the soldiers are losing the war, why it's important to actually suffer through that war and why it's important to fight in that way. So first of all, let's talk about the military, right? We say that as the commander, you're elected by those people who believe that the characteristic of the military is one that respects the group integrity and working together and respecting your brethren who is there with you, right? What we say is that that's why in the military, for example, you have like, for example, trust exercises, or for example, what they teach you is that you always have to prioritize your friend. You always have to prioritize a person on the battlefield. That is the first duty that you have to do, right? And what we say is that that is what the commander should uphold, because that is why they put the commander in the first place, and that is the expectation that he should do, right? What we say is that by using this bomb, it requires them to sacrifice the characteristic of the military as extremely important, right? So what we say is that the impact of this is that what their entire bench is doing is that they're sacrificing humanity for strategy, right? They're sacrificing the process and the procedure for the impact. What we say is that is extremely devastating, right? What they told us is that, okay, individual life is never something so important because anyways, like for example, medical resources are something that controls you, and anyways, the state gets to decide what to do with your life. What we say is that in those circumstances, the difference between medical resources in today's debate is that there's no possibility to achieve another situation because there's a trade-off of medical resources, there's a trade-off of resources in the status quo. But recognize that in today's debate, there's still possibility that we can negotiate. There's still possibility that there's an alternative action, right? And I'm going to also extend on that later. That's why we think that in today's debate, it's not so necessary to go to such drastic actions in order to do that. But second of all, and more importantly, why is humanity so important, right? Because we say that we should prioritize humanity. Because even if we achieve best strategy and protect people, right? What we say is that we lose something that is so important that it defines who we fundamentally are, right? Well, what we say, what that is the ability to make decisions that are not necessarily predicated on the outcome, right? And we say that that's something that differentiates from animals, for example. That's something that we as human beings have respected and should continue to respect. I'll take you later. But second of all, what I'm going to talk to you is about the principle of morality, right? So what we say is that under their side, they are telling commander to violate the characteristic of military, which is to just treat soldiers as property, right? If that's true, then why don't you attach a bomb to every single soldier in case they get captured, they can self-detonate and not reveal any information to the enemy? Wouldn't that be the best strategy for the nation? Because then you will surely be able to achieve a better situation in which your side will be guaranteed victory. But the reason we don't do that is because we still respect humanity of soldiers. Because as a soldier, you are trained and you value cooperation with other individuals, and that is what defines us as human beings, right? Human beings, that's what's important in today's debate. But finally, what we say is that what is the real cost of victory here? We say that even if you use the bomb, it damages the safety of the country in the future, right? Because what happens when you're using this bomb? It means that the characteristic of the military transforms into one as soldiers are just expendable. Soldiers are always expendable as property. That means that in the future, it becomes very difficult for soldiers to actually opt in to the military because they know that it's pointless for them to try and fight with valor and bravery and to actually fight for our country, right? They're just putting them as objects that say, okay, we have this weapon, so all we need is your body, okay? All we need is you to sit there and be still and not do anything, because all we need is you as a form of property, because as long as we have that, we can win any situation. People that go into wars value their own agency. They want to make active contributions in order to fight for their country. We think that when you just prioritize them as property, it means that you just, number one, you destroy the character of the military, but number two, it means that their people don't necessarily opt into the military, which hurts the safety of the country in the future. So let's say this war is over and we have another war in the future. What happens is that you have a military that is not based on trust, that is not based on people who are working together, but is okay, I'll take opening.
Your side will ignore the humane process to discuss morality, but not to use a weapon and to sacrifice many is also moral decision. Why is it legitimate instead?
Okay, because the difference between that, the difference is that under their side of the house, they're actively killing soldiers even when other options exist. Under our side of the house, we want to use this as a last resort because we recognize that negotiations and other options on other venues are still necessary, right? That's why we won't just kill them for nothing. We think that's extremely important. How's the time? I'm not keeping track.
6:40.
Okay, so basically what I told you was that even if we have to sacrifice strategy and the best outcome, what we always value as military and what the commander should uphold is a definition and integrity of humanity that is important to individuals and is what defines us and what establishes our identity. And that's why we're extremely proud to close.
We thank Dr. Chen for the amazing speech. We would like to welcome the government whip speech within 7 minutes here.
The central question which underlies in this motion is obviously whether commanders have the right to kill their soldier in order to achieve that responsibility which is imposed by the state on the shoulder of the commander. Open government talk about utilitarianism is a metric without justifying why utilitarianism is actually legitimate criteria to do so, why utilitarianism can be justified. Open question or the even closing question talk to, well, there are certain rules in the modern world in the case of warfare without justifying their own analogy, right? We're more than happy to say that if putting a bomb on the shoulder of a soldier and letting that person go to, for example, enemy's illusion can lead to more better outcome and achieve the responsibility on the shoulder of the soldier, that is okay. The burden of the opposition side in this debate is not just say, hey, there are some rules in the status quo, there are some illegitimate things in the status quo. Based upon our principle, we're more than happy to allow these things if that applies to our standard of morality and our standard of the principle. And that's why it implies that all of open closing positions arguments are merely tautological. Why this is problematic? Because as long as we identify the motion is highly philosophical, and that as such, that this is debate about whether murder of soldier by commander is justified, their argument doesn't stop because they need to talk about the logical collaboration behind the principle to pose this debate, and that's the framework we're going to give you in this point. But second of all, this is not debate about a specific context, like detailed situation, right? For example, it's nonsense to say that, well, everyone consents to this weapon, or not everyone consents to this weapon or not, right? It doesn't matter what the alternative is just, right? Because the motion say, in general context, in vast majority of contexts, why this is justified or not. That's what it implies. Second of all, it's not enough for opposition side say that main alternative exists or not. But furthermore, this is a ridiculous argument in this debate, right? The motion emphasizes explicitly say that, well, there's no time for us to even let civilians to escape, right? Is there any time for president to call a phone to, like America, for example, helping or something like that? There is no time for negotiation at all. Second of all, if international society is so trustworthy, why these warfare have been getting worse and worse, right? Why America didn't intervene, for example, right? And that's why the alternative argument, this merely asserted, merely suggested, doesn't matter in this debate. They have never told you the mechanism why this alternative does work in this debate. I'm also suggesting that alternative doesn't delegitimize this motion at all. Because still this motion is legitimate and the alternative may be legitimate by my opposition side in this debate. Couple of rebuttal independently from, respectively from two opening option and close option. First, let me start for opening option. They said genocide is bad. Yeah, because Japanese government don't have the right to control the life of other nations, for example, right? For example, an American citizen, and so on. They said, we can assume that all soldiers consent, but they said, well, there are some soldiers who want to live. Why can't assume that all soldiers want to see their family's life destroyed after occupation by, for example, a enemy, right? Many soldiers rather choose to die in order to save their fellow members of the community, in order to save their family, in order to save your, for example, children, right? That's also speculation. Second of all, the line from DLO was that, well, life is universal. First of all, then why war is okay to do things, right? We can't do anything at all, right? We are talking about specific context. The value of life cannot be universally guaranteed. Obviously, there's a trade-off between the soldier's life versus the entire civilian's life, honorable chair, right? But first of all, under their paradigm, this humanity of the soldier will be anyway lost, right? Because we're losing the war in the first place, right? It may be, there will be harsh attack by the opponent's side, therefore the soldier's life can be still destroyed under their paradigm. And furthermore, they said, well, soldiers sometimes don't consent to die. Well, first of all, consent does not matter. As my partner told you, I'm going to extend this point more. But furthermore, if consent is important, why are you okay with forcibly giving birth to people, right? They said it's a bad thing to kill people. But why is it okay to forcibly give a birth to life in the first place? There's no moral distinction there. But furthermore, that's why they die in this debate. But furthermore, closing government and closing opposition was more relevant maybe. But the thing here is that all of their argument was humanity is important. Yes, humanity might be important in general circumstances, right? That's why we in general circumstances assume that everyone's life is important in a vast majority of cases, right? In the case of there's a trade-off, we have to choose who to save, right? That's what government taught you already, right? Humanity is also possessed by civilian as well, honorable chair, right? They're going to destroy more people's humanity under their side of house. Many opposition said, for example, trust exercise exists. Yes, maybe, but it's not fundamental right. For example, we isolate soldiers from their family houses, and so we cut human connection between, for example, family and these soldiers. No, thank you. Second of all, they try to differentiate medical resources from this motion, and they say medical resources surely beneficial, allocation of medical resources surely beneficial, but this motion is not sure. First of all, emphasize that, well, this is probably surely going to happen, but medical resources, right? We think, for example, investing into pharmaceutical, some university to develop medicine for uncurable diseases is merely potential benefit, right? It only happened with 30% possibility or 21% possibility, right? We have to invest in these millions of dollars, despite the fact these millions of dollars can be surely used to save the poor people who are struggling on the street, right? That's what this principle does stand. No, thank you. But furthermore, they said, well, under our paradigm, soldier won't join anymore under our paradigm. First of all, we learned that this catastrophe is a bad thing, so we don't think war is going to happen. Because international society also recognize their own fault. That's why we can prevent future war. No, thank you. But furthermore, we use this as only last option. No, thank you. It means that under our paradigm, still soldiers are able to contribute by their own humanity, for example, fighting against enemy anywhere, right? This is merely a last result. Sure.
You denied every kind of right because everything is a social construct. Then please tell me in why your side, why it's a national interest, or why is it more beneficial to prioritize those kind of poor people or those kind of money? If you just give us a reason why we have to vote on your side.
No, we're saying that life has no value at all. We assume that life has a value. But we're saying that that's not fundamental, that's merely social contrast. It means that society have the right to control whose life should be prioritized, and we have the right to evaluate the value of life of people. That's why medical resource analogy kicks into this debate, alright? And that's why also commander, who are responsible to protect the nation's open, point out, should have the right to control the things don't misrepresent our argument. So then why is our extension extremely important in this debate? Open government, utilitarianism, I think they did a fantastic job in terms of having set up this debate, but they lack a fundamental philosophical justification behind this motion, right? It's not sufficient for open government to just say what the utilitarianism, as long as the motion explicitly say that this motion is about whether utilitarianism is okay or not. We closing government is the only one who actually gave you the mutual collaboration behind this principle, and that's why we stand for saving more people, stand for saving more people, and furthermore, we think we have the right to control the life of soldier. Thank you both for closing government.
We thank Kelly Hammer for the amazing government whip speech. We would like to welcome the last speech of this round, the opening opposition whip speech here.
Okay, Mr. Chair. As closing government argue, our point is more relevant, compared with opening of issues. And most relevant argument coming from my partner, what is a humanity and what is the difference human beings animal is different from animal, and more than that, why this activity is inhumane, why this activity is against purpose of military and purpose of commander. That argument is most important argument. Reason is quite simple. In this debate, the CZs and OZs ask us, logically we have to explain why the humanity is important and what is humanity, etc., etc. Only my partner can provide you. That is why we think that my partner's argument is so important in this debate. That is why I'm going to tell about why the humanity is more important than the argument coming from open government, for example, utilitarianism, and moreover compare with the argument coming from closing government, government can control soldier's life. That is okay. I explain one by one. As my partner clearly told you, only human beings can do can do something from different from those kind of animal, and only human beings sacrifice themselves for other people, those kind of cooperation, those kind of the feeling and those kind of humanity. Only human beings have compared with animal. In that kind of circumstance, if the human beings do those kind of things, use weapon in order kill the member of military. In that kind of circumstance, it's only human. It's only animal. It's only for example, only for effective benefit they do inhumane things. This is not human beings. Those kind of people should not do those kind of activity, because if they do those kind of things, they are people lose those kind of identity of the human beings. That kind of identity is so important compared with government side argument, because that kind of identity is quite irreversible things compared with opening government harm and closing government harm, because government harm coming from opening government is only some economical harm towards the citizens, some for example territory harm towards citizens. However, that kind of things can be reversible for a long time. For example, even in the case Japan or many countries can be developed by after for a long time. However, on the comparative, inhumane things is quite different from that kind of objective things, because if we lose identity of human beings, we can't recover so easily that kind of circumstance. And more than that, closing government told us even in their paradigm, humanity lose, because for example, if we lose war, many harm occur towards a country. However, we think the important difference is our side and their side. in our side, like that kind of like inhumane things doesn't happen in our paradigm. Only like some economical harm to other citizens. Only like not so like those kind of like for example torture or etc. That kind of like so severe harm does not occur. That is why we think that my partner's argument is not general things. My partner's argument is clearly a comparative issue compared with their side. Why only in our paradigm we can protect those kind of humanity, those kind of identity of the human beings. Opening.
If you say, like, please justify the military in war, if you think losing war is not so significant, then irreversible.
Yeah. Firstly, we think that even in today's case, especially in today's case, we think that even we lose war, there's no severe harm because we think that, for example, as the info slide said, if we can use this weapon, we can change the situation, we can win. Given that there is not so big difference in battlefield, only like small loss in this like battlefield, not so big loss in today's like battlefield because only we use one thing, we can change dramatically, like we can change the condition of war. Given that, like especially like two like competitive, like no so difference like in the battlefield. In that kind of circumstance, we can more than happy to use like for example non-conditional surrender. Only we use like conditional surrender. We are more than happy to use like many like condition. You know when they do those kind of surrender. That is why we think that kind of like objective harm also can be minimized even in our paradigm. Because reason is quite simple. Only we use weapon, we can change the situation. In that kind of circumstance, like other country also like fear that kind of circumstance, and the other country also have huge incentive to like those kind of those kind of agree with those kind of like negotiation. That is why we think that our paradigm that harm coming from opening government is not so huge. And next, talking about closing government before that.
So you said you should not objectify soldier, but under your paradigm, you expose at least civilians to this danger, right? Why can't you objectify the life of civilians to achieve your moral goal that you propose?
No, we are not like expose like citizens towards like inhumane things. Only we oppose those kind of people, like for example, harm coming from like economical harm or like territorial harm. That is basically it's quite different harm on the comparative. Our paradigm is inhumane like harm towards like human beings. On the comparative level, like still like those kind of harm is like morality is more. Like humanity is more important. And lastly, I developed the closing government. I meant the closing government. Like government have right to control like each individual and like soldier's life. However, we think that still, I think that even though they explain like a lot, still like too general analysis like coming from closing government. Because for example, if logic is true, they can do anything anyway. Like for example, also like torture, they never draw line like between the like torture etc. Anyway, like government can do everything towards those kind of like soldier in order to win those kind of like war or in order for like those kind of effectiveness in the country. It's quite unrealistic argument coming from closing government. That is why we think that like only my partner explained like why the humanity is important, why we should not do those kind of activity. Thank you.